Mostly what I'm going to talk about is teamwork. But I'm going to frame it in a context for you because I don't want you to think I'm coming here from California. I mean, I live in California. I live in Northern California. That's kind of where hippies started, right? And so when I come to the other parts of the world and talk about teamwork, people think that we're going to get naked and hold hands and sing songs, and hug or something like that. And we're not going to do any of that stuff. Because you see, teamwork is not just something that's soft. It's framed in something extremely important in terms of competitive advantage. You see, let me tell you my core belief about business. Any organization, whether it's a big company like Nokia or Sampo or any of the big companies in the region, Maersk, any company that's huge like that, or it's a small company, like one of my favorites from Copenhagen. Anybody from Copenhagen here? No? Nobody from Copenhagen? Oh, there they are. You're so quiet. You're just like, how polite you are, people from Scandinavia. Yes, we are here. You're supposed to go, woo! We're from Copenhagen. Joe and the Juice. This is this awesome new company. Are you familiar with it? Yeah, they're all like, yes, yes, yes. Okay, you're supposed to yell. Okay, so, or a small company like that that's kind of a new startup, or whether it's a church or a school or a little deli on the street corner, any organization that wants to be successful has to be good at two basic things. The first one is it has to be smart. Okay, smart. That makes sense, right? When I talk about smart, a smart company is one that's good at technology and strategy and finance and marketing and operations and all the decision sciences that they teach you about in business school or in business magazines. This is really important. I used to work at a strategic management consulting firm, and essentially the purpose of our firm was to help companies make smarter decisions through better analysis. Is this stuff important? It is absolutely important. But it's only half the equation when it comes to making an organization great. And it gets about 95% of the attention from most leaders. You see, in addition to an organization being smart, in order to be successful, it also has to be healthy. A healthy organization. And a healthy organization is one that has minimal politics and confusion, really high degrees of morale and productivity, and very low turnover in a good way. Turnover meaning employees leaving, not turnover like revenue. Okay, that's what a healthy organization looks like. When I show that slide to most CEOs, even the most cynical ones will look at that and they'll say, oh my gosh, that healthy stuff drives me crazy. It keeps me up at night. Morale, confusion, politics. They say, I would give my left leg to make my organization healthier. But then they look at it a little longer and they say, that's probably not very easy to measure, is it? No, it's not. It's probably a little emotional at times, isn't it? Yeah, it is. Yeah. I didn't learn about that in business school. I'll tell you what. Let's go focus on the left a little bit more. Let's tweak the dials on the smart side. They're like that old episode of I Love Lucy. You know the show I Love Lucy? You've seen this TV show? Where Ricky comes home, her husband, from work and finds Lucy crawling around on the living room on her hands and knees. And he says, what are you doing? She says, I'm looking for my earrings. And he says, you lost your earrings out here in the living room? And she says, no, I lost them in the bedroom, but the light out here is much better. And ladies and gentlemen, let me tell you this. Most leaders find that it's a lot easier to look for answers on the smart side of the equation because you can read about it and do studies and put it on a spreadsheet or a Gantt chart. But here's the thing. I am utterly convinced, completely convinced, that the area for the greatest competitive advantage and transformation is found on the right side of that slide, in being healthy. You know why? Because almost every organization in the world today is pretty darn smart. Because of the internet and nanosecond technology change and ubiquitous information, everybody knows enough about how to do their work. In 20 years of doing what I do, working with CEOs and their teams, I have yet to go into a company and walk out of a meeting with the executive team thinking these people are just too dumb. You see, everybody is pretty smart these days. However, The average company is still not very healthy. They are plagued by politics and confusion. And so what we're talking about here is the best way to differentiate a company in this era is to figure out a way how to make it healthy. That is the biggest competitive advantage, and the best companies in the world will be the ones that figure that out. Now, how do you do that then? If you buy into that, you say, okay, how do you make an organization healthy? Well, there's 4 things that a healthy organization does. 4 simple disciplines. The first one, which I'm going to talk about a lot today, is they build a cohesive leadership team at the top. Again, whether it's a massive organization or a small one or a department within a company, any organization, if it wants to be healthy, has to have a really cohesive team at the top. I'm going to get into that in detail today. But that's not enough. The second thing it has to do, and it happens concurrently, is it has to also get complete clarity among those leaders. So they have to be behaviorally aligned. That's leadership cohesion. But then they also have to be intellectually aligned, rowing in the same direction. That's clarity. Once an organization has done that, then, and only then, can it move on to the third thing, which is it has to over-communicate that clarity. It has to communicate it again and again and again and again and again and again and again. Research shows that people have to hear something 7 times before they believe it. Can you believe that? Employees in an organization have to hear something 7 times before they believe it. Most leaders do not like to over-communicate, though. Most leaders do not like to over-communicate. They remind me of that story about the wife who says to her husband, "Why don't you ever tell me you love me?" And the husband says, "Gee, I don't know. I mean, I told you when we got married. I'll let you know if it changes." Too many leaders are like that too. They think, I told you what the strategy was at the beginning of the year. You can always go back to the internet to look at those slides. I shouldn't have to repeat myself. The best companies, the best leaders are constantly over-communicating. And finally, fourth, those leaders are reinforcing clarity by building just enough structure in human systems to support it. Just enough. They institutionalize their culture without bureaucratizing it. Okay, I wanted to go over that in detail so that now, as I talk about teamwork, you understand why it's so important, because it's the first and most critical discipline in building a healthy organization, which is the biggest differentiator in great companies today. Let's talk about how to build a cohesive leadership team. Okay, I wrote a book called The 5 Dysfunctions of a Team. We're going to talk about it in a positive way today, but I kind of like the negative title for a couple reasons. From a marketing standpoint, I think it's more interesting. Imagine if somebody came to you and they said, "Hey, you should read this book, 4 Ways to Have a Perfect Marriage." I would be like, I don't know if there's a perfect marriage out there. And if I read this, I'm probably going to feel pretty bad about my own. But if somebody wrote a book that said 4 Ways to Destroy Your Marriage Forever, I would probably pick that book up and look at the table of contents and see if I'm doing any of those. And the truth of the matter is, I think there are 5 dysfunctions that destroy teams. I think there's 5 things that we do as a natural human consequence that destroys teams. And I want to tell you about those and talk about how we can overcome them today. All right. Any questions so far? Where's that first one? Oh, yes. I love questions.
All right. Hello?
Not working?
I'm not sure. No?
Okay, run up here and tell me, and I'll repeat it.
All right. Oh, I think it's
there it
working
is.
now.
Now it's
Hi,
working.
Dimitri from Nordic Startup. What do you think about decentralized teams? I think right now there's a lot of shift to go into completely decentralized and fully flat companies where leadership is completely in a different way, right? How does that fit into your model?
Okay, I think that here's the way I would answer that question. Did everybody hear that? What do I think of decentralized teams, flat organizations, that kind of thing? I do not like overly hierarchical organizations. I don't. But I love hierarchy. At the end of the day, I want to know who's in charge. And a good organization has a clear hierarchy and everybody knows in charge, and they don't have to rely on it to get things done. But they do have to rely on it to break a tie. And I think leadership is critical in an organization. And companies that say, well, we don't have to have any leaders are usually organizations that fall into consensus. And I'm not a believer in consensus. And we'll talk about why in just a second. But come up afterward and I'll give you a book. Okay? Okay, let me tell you about the 5 behaviors. The first behavior we have to master to build a team, oh my gosh, this is going to be obvious, folks, is we have to build trust. Can you believe how obvious this is? And I know Rachel in the last talk earlier today talked about institutional trust. Now I'm talking about something a little different. I'm talking about interpersonal trust. Now most people will say, well, Pat, how obvious is this? And it is, but there's a nuance here. There's something I want you to understand. When I talk about trust on a team, I'm talking about something different than you might be thinking. See, a lot of people, when we talk about trust, think of what I call predictive trust. Predictive trust means that 2 people that have known each other for a long time, they trust each other because they can predict one another's behavior. So you and I have worked together for many years. I know if I say something, this is probably how you're going to react. Or you and I have known each other for years. If you say something, this is probably what's going to happen. I can trust you. That's not what kind of trust I'm talking about here. When it comes to a team, when I talk about trust, I'm talking about vulnerability-based trust. The kind of trust that comes about when human beings on a team can and will genuinely say things to one another like, I don't know the answer, I need help, I think I screwed this up, you're much smarter than I am, teach me how to be like you, or even I'm sorry, what I said yesterday was totally unfair. When people can be that buck naked, if you will, with each other, that emotionally transparent, it changes everything on a team. And if you walk away from this presentation with just one thing, it's this: build vulnerability-based trust on your teams. It will change everything. The best way to understand the power of vulnerability on a team is to think about teams that don't have it. And let me tell you a story. I once worked with an organization. It was in the Silicon Valley near where I live in the San Francisco Bay Area. And this company called us to work with their executive team. Now, it was a startup, but it wasn't your typical garage band startup. It was a startup on steroids. I mean, it was a company that had all the money in the world. They'd handpicked these rock star executives from these big technology companies. Where are you going? Oh, see you. Come back soon. Okay, so I always wonder where they're going, and I have to ask. Oh, look, a bird. So this company was a startup company, and so we were going to work with them, but they decided to have us come down and watch one of their staff meetings before we did a 2-day offsite with them, which is what we do. So we went down and watched the meeting, and we noticed something really interesting. During the meeting, there was this one woman on the team. She was in charge of marketing, and whenever she said something at the meeting, something weird would happen. So they'd be in a great conversation about what are we going to do about this difficult competitor. And they'd be going back and forth talking about it. And when she spoke up and said, well, this is what I think we should do, the room would go silent. Nobody would say a word. Until somebody changed the subject and they moved on to the next conversation. They'd be talking about the next conversation, and they would be going back and forth, and then she'd say, well, this is what we did when I was at Oracle. And nobody would say a word. So we thought this was strange. So after the meeting, we went to one of the people on the team, and we said, what's going on here? Why does this, when she speaks, nobody else says anything? And they said, but you know why? Because she never admits she might be wrong. She never acknowledges that somebody else might have a better answer. So we finally decided, why even bother saying anything? So we thought that was interesting. So a week or so later, we had a 2-day offsite with this executive team. And on the first day, we talked about trust and vulnerability. But we also talked about strategy and tactics and the business and everything else. And then at the end of the first day of a 2-day offsite, we went to dinner. We went to an Italian restaurant where they had wine. Wine is the great elixir of truth on many executive teams, as you know. And this woman had a few too many glasses of wine. And at the end of dinner, she stood up, and this is a true story, and she raised her glass to the team, like a toast, and said, hey, everybody, we've been talking about trust today, and I just want you to know I've been married for 10 years, and I've just barely learned to trust my husband this year, so I'm not going to be trusting you guys anytime soon, if ever. Cheers. And we were like, Cheers. All right. So after the meeting, I went outside with the CEO, who was also a woman, and she and I went outside and we said, this is the problem. This woman has a fundamental trust issue. A pretty deep one, probably, too, for her to say that. And as much as we wanted to go get the local priest or minister and a psychological counselor in, and this woman's mother for deep tissue therapy, they had a business to run. But so the CEO said, Pat, work with her and try to get her to be more open, to be more vulnerable, more trustworthy. Well, the woman was not interested in it at all. And after many months of trying, it became very clear that she wasn't going to change. So the CEO finally, after too many months of this, managed her off the team and out of the company. And do you know the very next meeting they had without her there? The dynamics on that team had changed so much that you would have thought they had swapped out and changed every member of the team for someone new, because it was completely different with just one person gone. Ladies and gentlemen, when there's somebody on a team that cannot be vulnerable, that cannot say, I don't know the answer, or I need help, or you're better than I am at this, or I'm sorry, it spreads like a disease to the rest of the team. One person can poison a team that can't be vulnerable. It is so important to get there. Now, how do you do that? Well, here's the difficult news for those of you that are leaders. The leader of the team has to go first. If the leader of a team cannot go first in being vulnerable, he or she cannot expect anybody else to be vulnerable. That's why leaders get paid the medium-sized bucks, because they have to go first. I once worked with a CEO, a famous CEO. You know who this guy is. He's been on many national magazines, and he's well known. He was not a great leader at the previous company where he was. I don't know if he is today, but he's still out there. But I was working with this company, one of my first clients, and this guy is brilliant, intimidating, and famous, so nobody in his company ever disagreed with him. Nobody would push back on him or tell him the truth during meetings. So the head of human resources at this company, God bless her, she went to the guy and said, listen, you have to get people to open up to you more. You have to get people to tell you the truth. And so he reluctantly allowed my firm to do 360 feedback, where everybody gets a form to fill out. I don't love 360 feedback, but in this case, it was all they were willing to do. So we administered the feedback. We collected the results from all of his executive team members. And then we gave him the results back, and he proceeded to share those results with no one. So the head of human resources went to him and said, listen, you have to tell people on the team what you learned in the feedback. And so he said, okay, I'll do it. And then he reluctantly allowed me to observe that meeting because I was the consultant that administered the tool. So I sat off to the side on a little chair that had wheels on the bottom of it, which will become relevant here in a second. And he stood up in front of the team and he said, okay, it says here that I'm not a very good listener. What do you guys think? And this again is a completely true story. They went around the table and said, oh, I think you're a good listener. Oh, I think you're a good listener too. You're fine. You're much better than the last guy. Oh yeah, you're a great listener. Yeah, you're fine. You're fine. And he said, okay, good. Next one here. It says, and then he said, it says I don't give enough feedback or enough praise. I thought I'd gotten better at that. What do you think? Yeah, I think you're fine. I think you've gotten a lot better. I do too. And all the way around the table. So this is where I'm sitting here on my little chair with wheels on it, thinking to myself, this is where I have to lose a client or put one in jeopardy. So I'm sitting on my little chair and I go, eek, 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 and I scoochie up next to this famous CEO and I'm like, excuse me, but you're the only people who filled out the survey, so somebody in here had to write this. It was very quiet. Until the head of marketing slowly raised his hand, poor guy, and said, yeah, I'd like to get more feedback. I mean, my team would like to get more feedback from you, and they don't really hear from you if they do something well. You only talk to them if they screw up, so I think it would be good if you gave more feedback and more praise. Silence. Until the head lawyer said, I think you give plenty of feedback. I don't know what he's talking about. And everybody else said, we don't either. I don't get it. And the poor guy was just, I'm melting. The point of that story was that was the day that CEO did two things. First of all, he lost a ton of credibility. Secondly, and most important, he sent a message to the team that I am not vulnerable, I will not be vulnerable, I'm not going to admit my issues, and everybody else on the team said, then we won't either. Let me tell you something, that company spun out of control, failed essentially, got sold off for a fraction of its worth, destroyed a regional economy, a whole city of employees. And you know what the Wall Street Journal wrote about them? Oh, they had some strategy problems. They made some bad decisions with their product. And it's like, oh, those were downstream symptoms of the real problem. The real problem, as it almost always is behavioral. There was no trust on that team. Of course they had strategy problems. Of course their products had bugs. Because nobody would tell the truth. And it started with the leader. Now, what should that leader have done? He didn't have to stand up there in front of them and cry and pretend that he was being, that's stupid. He just had to be real. He just had to stand up there and say, hey, you guys, it says here I'm not very good at a few things, and, well, I've seen this on performance reviews in the past, and my wife tells me this once a week or so. So these are my weaknesses. I know about them. I'll try. You can call me on it. Now let's talk about yours. But nope, he stood there like the big emperor with no clothes with his butt hanging out, you know. How do I look, guys? And they're like, you look fine, boss. Now, some people say, but Pat, when you're the leader, you're not supposed to let people see you sweat. Have you heard of that saying? Don't let them see you sweat. Here's the thing. If you're a leader, your people see you sweating before you realize it. Think about it. You always know when your boss is sweating. Which is why the best thing to do if you're a leader, the best leaders are the ones that go, check this out. The best leaders are the ones that are vulnerable enough to say, listen, I know I've got issues. And you know what happens when a leader admits that? We actually give them more credibility. We trust them more because we know they know who they are. Okay? It's not a credibility gainer to pretend you don't have problems. You gain credibility when you admit that you have them. Now, if you come to work every day and you say, hey, look, I made a mistake. I made another mistake. I'm not very good at that. Whoops, I really screwed that up too. Now, that's a different issue. That's a competence problem, not a credibility issue. But your people don't expect you to be perfect. They want you to be honest. And when you can be honest with them and vulnerable, people will walk through walls of fire for their leaders. It's so ironic. We think we should hide our problems from our people, celebrate them, admit them, and they are going to trust us more. Okay. Trust is that important. I spent more time talking about trust on a team than I'm going to any of the others. You know why? Because if we can build trust, we have a much better chance of overcoming the other dysfunctions. But if we can't build trust, we will not be able to overcome the others. And the next one is really important to have trust, because if we don't have trust, we will never overcome the next problem, and we'll never embrace this, which is conflict.